Should the Dallas Cowboys sign All-Pro linebacker Bobby Wagner this offseason? All that and more. This episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your
Locked
daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on
Cowboys.
Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. He is Landon McCool. Check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, what's going on, sir?
Not much. It's a Friday. I will just give a quick weather update. In Los Angeles, it's freezing and it's raining. So it's like the 3 days of out of the year that's happening. But it's also questions day. So I'm excited to kind of dig in and get cozy and answer some questions.
Let's dive right into it. A lot of people want to know about Bobby Wagner, who will be released by the Los Angeles Rams before free agency kicks off. The Cowboys had interest last year. Are you interested in signing him again?
I think they have to look into it, right, and see what the number is going to be. I don't really know exactly what the details of his contract are, or if he's got any remaining money with the Rams after being cut. But I think the particulars of there are going to be important, especially considering everything that we talked about in yesterday's pod. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation because it's going to come down to much like it did last year, I think. Of a conversation of, well, would you rather have Bobby Wagner at his price or Leighton Vander Esch at his price? Except the funny thing is all the angles have changed now, right?
Well, and I think the prices have gone they're getting closer to each other, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, right? Is that I think last year, and I think even the one of the questions I saw this morning was, would you rather have Bobby Wagner for 3 years or Leighton Vander Esch for 1 year? I don't know that Leighton Vander Esch is available for 1 year necessarily. He had a really good season last year. He may want a kind of a multi-year deal as well. I agree with you. I think those numbers got closer together, right? Wagner got, even though Wagner had an outstanding season last year, not even a fall off season at all, still had a very fantastic season. I still think he's another year older, and Vander Esch had a better season, a much, much better season than everyone expected. So I think his number is going to go up. So the question is a lot more difficult. And I think it now becomes, well, what's the market going to dictate for these guys? Right. Because, and is that difference in cost is reflective of their difference in the play between the two. And I think it's tough math, right? It's difficult. I tend to think that they keep it. I think they go for Leighton Vander Esch. It's probably a cheaper option.
That's probably the cheaper option, probably the safer option. But I will say, I think, man, if you could add Bobby Wagner to a linebacker core that is so young, right? Because the other linebackers behind him are Damone Clark, Jabril Cox, and Devin Harper, right? You get an all-pro guy at the very top of that position to help those guys kind of, get up to speed. And you don't need Wagner to do all the coverage stuff and covering, running backs, out wide. You just need him to make every single tackle in the middle of the field. And I think he can do that. I think, man, he would be an awesome fit in Dan Quinn's defense. We've already seen it before, but I will say the fact that Seattle and the Rams have now both moved on from him in back-to-back years, despite playing really well, does make me wonder, are they seeing some stuff in the medicals, or are they seeing him in practice? It takes him a long time to get ready to play on Sunday. And they're just, because his contract was very reasonable. I think the Rams were going to pay him $10 million this year. Roquan Smith is getting paid $20 million in Baltimore. If you think Bobby Wagner can still play at an all-pro level, you keep him at $10 million, right?
Yeah, but you have to wonder, both of those situations were kind of Seattle was just basically in a full rebuild, right? And Los Angeles,
but they were in a full rebuild with cap space, though. The difference with the Rams is they're trying to shed as much cap as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's the more important thing here, right? Is that with the Rams, this release is kind of more about what they've done than I think what Bobby's done, right? Bobby had pretty fantastic season last year. And even if you're talking about having to kind of work him into situations or kind of, work with him to get him to game day ready. I mean, the results are the results, right? Like, and not to speak out of both sides of my mouth, because I do think that there's a difference between what I think the Cowboys will do and what I would necessarily want to do. And I think that if the Cowboys are smart, they look at that playoff game that they just played in against San Francisco, and they see what Fred Warner did for that defense and the differences between what that San Francisco defense has and what this Cowboys defense has. I think we can talk about that, the defensive line. I think that there's, some conversations there, but having an elite linebacker like that at that, position when you have all these other kind of pieces involved, it really just takes – it suffocates offenses is what it does. It takes away all the options in the middle of the field. And suddenly it becomes a slog just to kind of continually make first down. So I think that the Cowboys should kick the tires here pretty seriously. And again, I think the Dan Quinn relationship is going to have a play here. The question becomes like, honestly to me is which is better for the situation that the Cowboys are in this year, not last year, this year, in the Bobby Wagner versus Leighton Vander Esch, competition, I guess, or saga for money, or however you want to sign that.
I think if I'm the Cowboys, I'd be weary about giving either player a multi-year deal, right? Leighton Vander Esch, as much as we love him,
the injury stuff.
I mean, the injury stuff is scary. So I don't know that you want to be giving him long-term deals. I kind of think doing this, year by year structure makes a lot of sense. So would I be willing to pay Wagner $3 million more than Leighton Vander Esch? Maybe. I don't know. I'm conflicted here, Landon. Just honestly, I if the Cowboys signed Bobby Wagner in free agency on a 1-year, $10.5 million deal, I probably would be really excited because of what he could do leadership wise, what he could do with the rest of the linebackers. And you need a guy that can take on guards and make every tackle in the run game. That's Bobby Wagner.
I think the question becomes, how long is he going to be Bobby Wagner for, right? Because we're approaching the
one more year. That's probably all you need him is.
Are you going to get him for one more year? Because that's the problem. Is I think that's where the potential downside with this is that Bobby Wagner going to be interested in a 1-year deal? And if not, what's he going to sign for, a 3-year deal? And if you sign him for a 3-year deal, what does year 2 and 3 look like? I feel like I could probably comfortably guarantee that Bobby Wagner has another good season out of him.
It's just whether is it an All-Pro year? Is it a Pro Bowl year? Is it a solid starter?
Yeah. And then what's his asking price? I mean, he's a free agent, he's a vested vet. So he's been released. Like, he can ask whatever he wants. So
I'm interested.
There'll probably be competition on the market too. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all develops, honestly.
Well, he did say, I mean, at least from the tweet from Adam Schefter, which who knows, he said he wants to, compete and win, to try to win a championship. I mean, right there, your teams are pretty narrow, right? If you're just going to pick teams that are in the playoffs last year, and even then you narrow that down because there's a lot of other teams that are already paying linebackers or have drafted linebackers high. My guess is there's only going to be 3-ish suitors for Bobby Wagner. And you've got to think that the Cowboys are at the very top of the list. The other team last year that was close to signing Bobby Wagner was the Baltimore Ravens. But again, they traded for Roquan Smith this offseason and just gave him $20 million a year. So
I will also add that this year, as opposed to last year when we were in this, the Cowboys don't have Jalen Smith's dead money on their books anymore. Yes. So if they're looking at positional spending, which I'm assuming that they're accounting dead money in there, they probably have a little bit more cash to allocate to the position than they did last year.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the draft and a potential quarterback that the Dallas Cowboys could have their eye on. All that next. This episode is brought to you by Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat, but you don't want all of the fat and the calories, then you've got to try a Built Bar. Just made it through the holidays, made it through Valentine's Day. We're looking forward to summer. So if you're trying to get in shape and stay fit, Built is here for you. What makes Built Bar so good? Well, for starters, 100% real chocolate, 17 grams of protein, only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar. You absolutely cannot beat that. And the best part is, now you don't have to wait to go get Built Bars. Before, you can go online. You had to order, wait a week or so. They show up at your door. Now you can just go to your local Walmart or your Sam's Club. You can pick up a 4-box of the cookies and cream or the double chocolate or the coconut puffs at, your Walmart pharmacy. Or if you live near a Sam's Club, go check out the 13-bar box of some of the hit flavors, including brownie batter and churro. You can thank us later. Go to built.com to see their entire inventory, or again, check out Walmart or Sam's Club for the boxes that they have right on hand. All right, Leighton, let's get to some more Twitter questions. We've got one about C.J. Stroud because there was a report out, I believe, early this week that the Cowboys were interested or intrigued by Ohio State quarterback C.J. Stroud. That came from our guy, Mike Fisher. I just want your thoughts on what's going on here.
Well, I mean, you and I had a conversation about this beforehand, and I think it's really easy to like, as guys whose job is to like hear this stuff and kind of try to like, read tea leaves and try to, figure out what's going on here. It's easy to see these kind of storylines and then just let them roll off your back like they didn't happen, because it's so outrageous. And I think that that's what's going on here. You brought it up yesterday. I mean, while we were discussing the interest in the Kayvon Thibodeau stuff that last year, right? We started to hear rumblings about that. And when we heard it at the time, I think our reaction was very similar to what we were seeing with the CJ Stroud stuff. Like, well, why are we hearing this? Like, we're not, Thibodeau's not like a realistic target for the Cowboys. They can't trade up to go get Thibodeau, or, I mean, they wouldn't do that,
No.
And guess what? Surprise, they didn't. I think that what's going on here, and you tell me what you think too, is I think that there is kind of a new brand of media chum being thrown into the water by the Cowboys front office. I think we're in the doldrums of February. We haven't gotten to the combine yet. It's kind of the slow part of the cycle for Cowboys news. I think what's happening here is that media folks are getting thrown something to talk about that isn't necessarily, going to interfere with anybody's draft plans, right? Like the Cowboys can tell you that that they think that CJ Stroud is a quarterback one, and who cares? Like, the Cowboys are picking 26. They're not trading up to go get CJ Stroud. They're not going to be in competition. No one's going to sneak up in front of them to get CJ Stroud. Like, they're already there.
This is a reenaction of how it went, I'm sure, with a reporter and let's say Will McClay. Let's say Will McClay is the source here.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Will, who do you like in this draft? There's a lot of good players in this draft. We really like that CJ Stroud, one of the better quarterbacks in this class. We think he'd fit well in our scheme. We think he's probably going to be a top 2 or 3 pick, but we're intrigued by him.
Boom, story.
I mean, that's it. Like, it's just one of those things like, hey, this might be the best quarterback in the class. We know we're not going to draft him, but I was telling you pre-show, you can think Dak Prescott is your franchise quarterback and that he's going to be here for the next 10 years and still think CJ Stroud's the best quarterback in this draft class and not have any intention to go draft him at all. Like, both of those things could absolutely be true.
These aren't romantic partners. This is what I was telling you beforehand too. It's like you're allowed to like have a quarterback and have him be your quarterback and still think that this other quarterback is good. Scouts are going to scout. Like, they're
a perfect
evaluating all
example
these
of that is like Matthew Stafford, right? Like, Cowboys have always loved Matthew Stafford, and when he was available via trade, was that 2021? They didn't do anything about it because they had Dak, right? It's like, hey, we love this guy, or Sean Payton for coaches, right? Dallas has always loved Sean Payton. Doesn't mean they're going to act on it.
I think the difference between why there's like kind of a panic about this year and then there was last year when it was Thibodeau is because this is a quarterback. Because it's a quarterback that we're talking about. I think that for scouts, they have to scout all these players. They have to imagine every single one of these players in their system. So, yeah, they're going to look at the quarterback, and guess what? They don't have to hate every quarterback they see if he's not Dak. They're going to have an opinion on him. So, that doesn't mean that the Cowboys, that's actionable intelligence on what the Cowboys are going to do. It's just an opinion that, someone in the front office had. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to try to, reverse engineer how the Cowboys are going to trade up to go get CJ Stroud.
And look, you always have to do your due diligence because you just never know what's going to happen, right? Let's say 3 other quarterbacks get drafted ahead of CJ Stroud, and it's Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, and Bryce Young. And all of a sudden he falls to you at 26. At least you'd like to know whether you like him or not. You want to watch him and stuff. Or, I mean, this is even more unlikely. what if the Raiders get really desperate and like, hey, you know what? We need a quarterback. Here's 3 first-round picks, Devontae Adams and Max Crosby. I'm just making this up. For Dak Prescott, you can go take your number 1 quarterback in the class. At least you have to think about it, right?
That's a pretty good trade.
Right. And so, and
yeah.
again, totally unrealistic, but it's more than likely nothing's going to come of it. And it's just that the Cowboys like C.J. Stroud. They think in Mike McCarthy's offense with these weapons, he could look pretty good.
Absolutely. I think it's nothing more than that. And I think, it's okay for them to like guys that they aren't going to take, or they don't have the ability to take, or whatever. I think that's totally normal.
All right. This next question comes from Cowboys Due Diligence, which I think is really funny.
I love it.
Will the Cowboys be willing to draft a smaller wide receiver or running back? Because if not, it really limits their draft pool.
It's a good question. I think that this is something that if you had asked me this 2 years ago, maybe even a year ago, I probably would have said no. I think they're definitely only going to fit inside their very strict mold of what they're looking for athlete wise. And look, I mean, maybe that still hasn't changed. Maybe these preferences are, Will McClay preferences that won't change despite the change in offense or anything like that. But I will say that the evidence has pointed elsewhere. The evidence has shown that they've been willing to kind of look at some of these sort of smaller wide receivers. I mean, in what they've signed in the offseason, and obviously a kick returner, right? And but also with T.Y. Hilton, right? Like, I think he's not a big wide receiver, and he certainly doesn't necessarily fit the mold of wide receiver that the Cowboys would potentially sign.
Yeah.
In the past. I think the thing that kind of, I don't think that's so clear that they've bucked the trend, right? Because it could be a situation where he's a veteran, he has special skill set, they're making an exception.
What he can do. There's no
they know what he can do, right? So maybe that isn't something that is an obvious indication, because I think the thing that will be the trend breakers when they draft a guy like that, which we have not seen yet. Yeah. So because I think that's really been the difference, is that when they draft in the top 100 and they draft, in the top ends of the round for wide receiver, they're trying to hit those molds. And I think the same thing goes for positions like defensive back and some other spots, right? I think that will be the kind of final indication that they are willing to invest in a player like that. I don't think that they view that as a schematic limitation, because clearly they wouldn't have signed guys like that. But the question becomes, will they be willing to draft and develop someone who is kind of a diminutive speed wide receiver, which, you're right, there are a ton of those guys in this draft, and a lot of them look pretty good.
I think they're way more likely to do it at wide receiver than running back. I don't see them drafting like a sub 190 pound running back anytime soon. Like, even Pollard coming out was 210 pounds. Like, if they draft a running back, it's going to be somebody that's over 200 pounds, probably 6 foot tall, because that's just what they like. Now at receiver, I could see them going for one of these 5'11", 185 pound guys if it's the right fit. Now, smaller than that, and there are some guys in this class that are smaller than that. Tank Dell from Houston is one of them. That's where I wonder, like, how much interest the Cowboys would have, especially because they already have one of those guys on the roster in Kevontae Turpin. Like, do you want to have 2 sub 170 pound receivers on your roster? I don't know. But I don't think they're going to have to be 6'1", 210 pounds for the Cowboys to draft him.
I do feel like that they have started to move away from that being a prerequisite to playing wide receiver for the Cowboys, which it felt like that was the case. And it may have even started all the way back with Randall Cobb, frankly, when they signed him, and he was, 6 foot if he's standing in high shoes, right? So I think that there is a large percentage of wide receivers in the NFL that play in that, let's say, 5'11" to 6 foot range, right? There's a class of those folks that are, technician route runners, speed. Some of them are speed guys that the Cowboys have not really tapped into before. It'll be interesting to see if, now that there's more of an emphasis on route running, that they don't seem to kind of maybe lower the restrictions of height on some of these guys, if they have the kind of skill set that you're looking for to kind of fit into the system.
All right, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about one guy that we're interested in seeing at the Combine, and the Cowboys have finalized their coaching staff. What does that mean for the 2023 season? All that and more next. This episode is brought to you by the Ultimate Football GM app. You've heard us talk about this game before. It's Absolutely. So much fun. I can't tell you how much fun I had competing against the other Locked On hosts during the season. But now it's your turn to compete. More on that in just a second. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise, well, your dream can come true, as this game is definitely for you. You're going to manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through seasons, and lead your team to glory, trying to build a dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you're going to be responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, as well as all the ups and downs of the season. All of this in a challenging but realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline, so you can play on the go as you want to and when you want to. We've created a Locked On League for you to compete against other Locked On fans all over the world. Can you be the ultimate Locked On Football GM? Choose the Locked On League in the App Store to join, and we'll see if you can create a football dynasty. Locked On Cowboy listeners will get a 100% free boost to the franchise when using promo code Locked On, all in caps, in the game store. That is Locked On, all in caps. So make sure you check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the App Store. That is ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, Landon, this question from Mark. Who is one player you are watching closely at the NFL Combine this year?
One player, huh?
I got the one for me, and it might be
give
the
me
same
your
one.
because
I think it's Jackson Smith and Jibba, who we
God,
talked about.
dang it, he was one of the ones I was going to talk about.
Well,
yeah.
and honestly,
Yeah.
it's probably for the same reason. Like
Yeah.
most importantly, I just want to see him test, because if he doesn't test at all and he's still having some, ill effects from that hamstring injury, now I'm getting really worried, right?
Yep.
I also want to see him run. Not that he needs to run. He's not going to run in the 4.4s. It's fine. But is he a 4.52 or is he a 4.64?
Yeah.
Because that does make a little bit of a difference for me. If it's a 4.55, whatever, move on. But if we're getting into the 4.6s, that's when I get a little bit concerned about a first round receiver.
Yeah, I agree. I think that for all the reasons you just mentioned, his game is one of those that we talked about, right? Where don't overthink it. Like, he has all the skills that you want, like naturally as a wide receiver, but you have to be able to kind of confirm that he can operate at that minimum level speed wise, right? And I think his game lends to, in the NFL, needing to at least be a 4.5 guy, not below 4.6. I just don't know that he's got. I think for 4.6 guys, nowadays that game just doesn't translate. Really the 4.6 guys that probably will make it are bigger guys that don't separate, that are bad ball catchers. But that's just a brand of wide receiver that isn't very prevalent anymore in the NFL.
And he's not that big. Like he's
that's not his game
6
either. Yeah.
Right.
So like he needs to, I think, to kind of complete the picture of who this player is, he needs to run in the 4.5s. And if he does, I think he's exactly the guy that we think he is. And I think he's worth a first round pick.
I agree. He's the one guy that I'm going to be watching, I believe, next Friday or Saturday, the wide receivers run. Looking forward to watching him. All right, last thing. Go ahead.
I got to throw my guy, because I do think that, he
I
was certainly.
I thought he was your guy.
No, he was certainly on the list, but I do think that another guy that I want to kind of see is Kelee Ringo, right? Because I do think that I'm not a huge fan of Kelee Ringo, but I do think that Kelee Ringo is a guy that is, and I guess let me preference this. I'm not a fan of Kelee Ringo where it seems like he's going to be drafted, right? Like, I think that I wouldn't mind having Kelee Ringo as part of my squad, but I don't want to take him at 26. That's just, where how I feel about it. It'll be interesting to see exactly how much he blows the doors off the place. I mean, he's supposed to test as a very good athlete. And I do think that how that goes will affect where his draft stock is. And the reason that I'm interested in him is because, to me, if he doesn't test as well as he is expected to, right? And he's, if you watch the tape, he's very kind of limited scheme wise as to what he can, where he can fit the best. I think he could be a really, really good option for the Cowboys at the bottom of the second round if things happen. There's so many cornerbacks in this draft. There's so many like great athletes that and especially body types that are similar to Keely Ringo that I wonder if it isn't possible that because of that he doesn't get pushed down a little bit. And the Cowboys, again, don't like him at 26, but love him at the bottom of the second round. I think that's a great draft pick.
I think he needs to test like a 95th percentile athlete or better, right? Like if he runs a 4.51, I'm going to be pretty disappointed because he wins basically by his athleticism. So that's a good call there. Last thing, Cowboys announced their coaching staff today.
Yeah.
Nothing super surprising. The only thing is Jeff Blasco went from an offensive line assistant to the running back coach, but he's still going to be the run game coordinator. After looking at the finalized list, anything stand out to you?
No, just that. I mean, I think we talked about that. We thought it was interesting that Blasco was going to come back as a running back coach, but I think we also, were very well confident that that was related to being the run game coordinator overall. No, I think we talked about all these guys. I mean, I think we haven't necessarily talked about Scott Tolzien as the quarterbacks coach, but
he's been there a while.
He's been there a while. And again, I think I would just remind folks that this isn't a situation where the quarterback's coach is like the personal coach of the quarterback. I guess, like coaching and development and skill development and all that stuff, that happens mostly in the off season, away from the facility with their own personal coaches. Quarterback coaches, obviously will help tinker with that and will obviously have suggestions there. But mostly what quarterback coaches do, from what I understand during the season, is help with film breakdown, help break down opponents, help the quarterback look and see where they could find weaknesses in the defensive opponent at each week, and just kind of coordinating things overall to making sure that the system is being run properly. So I wouldn't look at this as anything more than just a guy that's already familiar with McCarthy's system being a voice in the room with Dak.
I'd also mention that the Cowboys made a couple of interesting hires on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
Sharif Floyd, they finally got him after all these years of actually liking him. Now he's their assistant defensive line coach. And then Darian Thompson, a safety that was really a special teams captain for forever.
A guy that we tried to cut for years and years and years
never
and years
cut.
and just never could because he just too heady. He was too smart and he knew what he was doing. So
I do like this idea of like bringing in these guys that are like 29, 30 years old and just getting them in the building and kind of developing them as coaches. Like we talk about developing players all the time, but not enough about developing coaches. So I think this is pretty cool.
Absolutely. And I think it's also beneficial to the players to have somebody who played in the league, who can relate to what they're going through and are close enough in age that it's more of a big brother situation as opposed to like a parent situation,
I mean,
I think the players react to that better.
Yeah, and Sharif Floyd, like if the Cowboys get a little bit thin at defensive tackle, like, sign him up.
Are you saying that Sharif Floyd is thick? Is that what you're saying?
I'm just saying that he might be their best interior pass rusher right now.
Oh, jeez.
I still like him quite a bit. All right, that is it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in. As always, you can download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Go check us out on YouTube. Landon, you and I will be back on Monday to talk about some very, very interesting tight end prospects that the Cowboys might be able to draft in round one. I'm looking forward to that. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. Enjoy your weekend. We'll see you guys next time.